Bonjour à tous.
Good morning to all.
Whether it's to cover the bills, to keep people on the payroll, or to make rent on a storefront, many Canadians need a hand right now. So over the past few months, we've brought in new programs that are doing exactly that. Just take the wage subsidy and what it has meant for people like the employees at Euroline in Oakville. This family-owned appliance business had to close their operations and lay off staff because of the pandemic. It was a really tough spring. But when they applied for the wage subsidy, they were able to then rehire their entire team. And that matters to the 22 people who now have their paycheck again. To all employers, please use the wage subsidy if you haven't already. This help is designed for you and your employees, and if you need more support, apply for the Canada Emergency Business Account. On the CEBA in particular, I want to remind everyone that we recently expanded the eligibility for this program to include even more small businesses like farmers. The new application process will open on Friday, and in the coming days, we'll have more information to share about it. For now, though, you can go to edc.ca for information about the documents you'll need to apply. In the last few weeks, things have started to look up for a lot of people. But that said, we also know that far too many Canadians are still struggling. If you're having troubles finding a job, you shouldn't also be worrying about whether you'll hit the limit of your CERB benefits. So right now, we're working on a solution to extend the benefit for people who can't return to work yet. We'll have more details later this week, but for today, I want you to know that we will continue to be there for you and your family. In
the last few weeks, things started to better for many people, but we know that too many Canadians still have difficulties. If you can't find a job, you shouldn't be worried not to be able to get the Canadian Emergency Response Benefits. We're looking for a solution to prolong the CERB for those who don't have a job because of the pandemics. We'll have more details later this week, but I want you to know that we will continue to be there for you and your family. At this topic, I would also like to say that all public workers that have been really working hard for the last few weeks so that Canadians do get the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit and the wage benefits. This is the Public Office Week, and I want to thank all of them what they've been doing.
National Public Service Week, I want to thank all the women and men who work incredibly hard to get Canadians the help they need. Especially recently, they've done a remarkable job for their fellow Canadians. No one could have predicted that this spring would turn out the way that it did. Certainly for farmers who keep our grocery stores stocked and our families fed, it's been an unexpectedly challenging few months. With restaurants and hotels closed for weeks, many producers were left with extra food they couldn't sell. Farmers work hard to raise their livestock and grow their crops. They shouldn't be in a position where they have to see that wasted. And that's why today we are opening applications for the Surplus Food Rescue Program. This program will help get products that farmers and fishers can't sell, whether that's potato, poultry, or seafood, or otherwise, to communities that need it. People across the country will benefit, including in remote northern communities. This is a win-win. Farmers will have people to buy their goods, and food will get to the plates of families who wouldn't have enough otherwise. Aujourd'hui, we're
launching applications for the program of Surplus Food Reserve. Because of pandemics, many producers can't sell their products. They've worked hard to grow their crops, to raise their livestock. It would be terrible to waste it. With this program, we will bring about the excedent, and this is a win-win situation. Farmers will have a market for their products, and families that need it will be fed.
In many ways, COVID-19 is a challenge like we've never dealt with before. But it certainly isn't the only test we're facing. In an increasingly complex and interconnected world, we need to think outside the box in order to keep people safe, to grow our economy, and to shape our future for the better. Artificial intelligence has the potential to be an incredibly powerful force for good, but it must be used responsibly and ethically. And on that front, Canada is continuing to lead the way forward. Today, as one of 13 founding members, Canada helped launch the Global Partnership on Artificial Intelligence. As part of this initiative, we've also worked with the government of Quebec to set up a centre of expertise in Montreal, which will be one of the partnership's 2 global hubs. This country is home to some of the world's most innovative people, not to mention the fact that Canadians have pioneered much of today's AI tech. It only makes sense to put that expertise to use.
Canada is launching in the World Partnership on Artificial Intelligence as one of the 13 founding members. With this initiative, we also worked with the government of Quebec to put in place in Montreal one of the 2 expertise centers of this partnership. Canadians are amongst the most innovators in the world and pioneers of many technology in artificial intelligence. So we're going to put this expertise to profit.
Earlier this morning, I also joined Minister Ng and her counterparts in the Ottawa Group on World Trade Organization reform. We discussed our work together on trade, on safeguarding international supply chains, and on building a global economy that works for everyone. Now, more than ever, it is vital that we collaborate across borders to keep our economy strong and our citizens safe. This pandemic is a global crisis, and it requires global solutions. So in response to a request from the United Nations, I can also announce that Canada will provide airlift support for urgently needed medical and humanitarian supplies. Through this mission, we will be delivering help to some of the world's most vulnerable people.
This morning, I'd like also to highlight that today it's the World Day against mistreating elderly. These people build our country. We must protect them and make sure that they get the care they need. Whether you decide to call your grandparents to get some news, we can all do our share. In Papineau, the table of consultation is working an incredible job to prevent mistreating of the elderly. I'd like to take this opportunity to recognize and thank all those that work in in the similar organizations in the country, taking care of our elderly. Today and every day, we must work together to make sure that they are safe, they are secure, and whatever their age.
Our grandparents and our elders built this country, and we all have a part to play in keeping them safe. On that note, let me give a big shout out to the Rogers Foundation for their $60 million donation to help the most vulnerable during this pandemic. I know this incredible initiative, will have a huge impact on a whole lot of people's lives. And speaking of people who make a difference, I want to end this morning by recognizing the Canadian troops who arrived in Ukraine yesterday to resume their training mission. The work they're doing, together with our partners to build a more secure country, is incredibly important. I know all Canadians will be thinking of these brave women and men in uniform as they serve overseas. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va maintenant commencer la période de questions par le téléphone.
We're going to now starting the period question by the phone.
Merci.
Thank you.
Première question, Michel Lamarche, TVA.
First question, Michel Lamarche, TVA.
Bonjour, Monsieur Trudeau.
Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. Quickly, are you ready to commit firmly on this prolongation of the CERB? We understand that you've got a plan for this week, but can you confirm that it will be prolonged? I can reassure Canadians across the country, like I've said, since the start, we will continue to be there for people who need help. We're going to announce more details later this week. Follow up? So no prolongation, no firm commitment. I'd like to hear you. on another topic, there was some protests against Law 21, and you've promised to do better as far as facing or fighting racism. Are you gonna try to do something against Law 21 that many consider that it is racist? My position on this, it's been known, and it's the same, but we're looking to which extent Quebecers are protesting against this law, and we've got a judiciary system that is continuing its job, and we will continue to keep an eye on it. Next question.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Kate Bongaro, Bloomberg, line open.
Hello, Mr. Trudeau. I have a question regarding immigration targets. Do you have any sense of how the downturn will impact immigration flows over the next 2 years?
Well, we recognize that there's been a couple of months in which very few people have come to Canada. We've closed the borders because of COVID-19, and that obviously has had an impact on the number of immigrants arriving in Canada. But Canada continues to be a country that knows that immigration is an essential source of growth, of prosperity, of opportunity, both for Canadians and for people arriving in this country. And we look forward to continuing to be a strong country in regards to immigration. We will have more to say on that, obviously, as our country begins to reopen. But at this point, we are still very much in the closed phase of the pandemic response.
Following up, Kate.
Small businesses say the rental subsidy isn't being used because landlords won't apply for it. How is your government planning to adapt this program to get more uptake and make sure that it's getting money into the pockets of small businesses that need it?
We have been impressing upon the provinces the need to move forward with eviction bans, for example. This is something we talked about a number of weeks ago when we moved forward with the commercial rent subsidy. We've seen a number of provinces move forward on it, but we know that more provinces need to step up. This is an area where the province gets to make the rules. The federal government doesn't have the levers against landlords on that, but I certainly hope more provinces will understand that an evictions ban is the right way to go. Okay.
We have highlighted the need to stop evictions in support of commercial rent subsidies, but these laws and rules must be made by the provinces. Some have done it so far, but we hope all of them will.
Thank you. Merci. Next question, Brian Lilly, Toronto Sun. Line open.
Good morning, Prime Minister. You've been talking a lot about Canada needing to do better, Canada needing to acknowledge the past when it comes to issues around race. Your party's primary fundraising club is called the Laurier Club, and I'm wondering, given Prime Minister Laurier's history with the Chinese head tax, with blocking immigration from India, signing an order in council banning black immigration, will you change the name of the Laurier Club?
Thank you for your question, Brian. Obviously, we recognize that over the past decades and generations, Canada has not done well enough. I've apologized in the House for the Komagata Maru. We've made apologies for the head tax. We've made a direct acknowledgement of the very, very many mistakes Canada has made in the past. Those mistakes continue today with systemic racism that continues, and we need to take concrete measures to move forward, to change the systems, to improve the systems, to better support racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians, and that's absolutely what we're going to focus on. Obviously, there are many conversations going on around the names of sports teams, around statues, around the way we commemorate historical figures, and those conversations are going to be important and need to continue, and we encourage those conversations to be had.
I think that Canada must do better, obviously, when it comes to fighting racism, systemic racism. Obviously, there are many things in the past of where we had to apologize to, we engage ourselves to do better, but we still see today that we've got systems that are not fairly treating racialized Canadians or Indigenous people, and this is why we will continue to work very hard to improve the systems as far as this story to look into the name of teams, of clubs, of statues, and buildings. There's always some conversations going on, and we must keep going. We're going to listen to Canadians, and we'll go from there.
Well, I'd like to hear specifically from you, Prime Minister. How far back do you think you have to go? What is the cutoff? Is it owning slaves like James McGill, the founder and person that your alma mater is named for? Is it holding views 100, 200 years ago that are incompatible with today's views? What is it that where do you think the cutoff line is? Where do we draw the line? Where do we say this needs to be renamed, that doesn't?
I think, first of all, it's a sign of progress that things have changed so much from 100 years ago, 200 years ago, in so many ways. We have significantly improved as a society, and there is still much more to do. And I think on all these situations, it has to be discussed on a case-by-case basis. We know there will be a range of views on any given issue, and I think we need to listen carefully and with a lot of sensitivity to concerns that are brought up around what we look to renaming, what we continue, and what we use as learning lessons for future generations.
I think that we must approach all these issues case by case. We are listening each other, and we recognize that we have to be careful to the perspective of others, and we're trying to find the best way to go forward and to recognize the mistakes of the past, but also recognize the evolution that we've had. Thank you. Last question on the phone.
Thank you. Merci.
Next question. Hélène Bujotti, Le Devoir. Good morning, Mr. Trudeau. I simply would like to come back on the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. You're looking out to prolong it. I don't understand what is so long. What's the problem to push back the date? We are reworking. Like I said, we're going to have an announcement in the next few days, but it won't be this morning. This morning, I can reassure every Canadian that are getting the CERB, that are looking for a job, and that are not sure they can find a job, and that we will continue to be there to support them. Like I've said from the start, we're a government that will be there to help people.
People have questions about what's going to happen as they end their CERB benefits in the coming month and are worried that they're not going to be able to find another job. I will be making an announcement in the coming days on that extension and on that issue. But for now, all I can say is that we will continue to be there to support Canadians. We have said this from the very beginning, that our government will be there to support Canadians in need, and people can be reassured that we will continue to be there.
So I understand that the norms of the CERB may change, not only the date, but do you think it will be sufficient to get the support of the NDP? There's going to be a vote on subsidies and a confidence vote. NDP is asking for prolongation, otherwise they're going to vote against. Do you think that we can find ourselves with a minority government that falls? In the minority parliament, it's the parliamentaries that will decide what's happening. We will continue to help Canadians. We will continue to be there for families, for workers that need it. I think that's what everybody is expecting in the chamber. Philippe Vincent Frozy from CBC. In New Brunswick, there's 2 Indigenous that have been killed by police balls, and there's one family that's asking for a public inquiry. Do you agree that we need a public inquiry to put some light? I think that first, these families deserve to have answers. And we're with them. Obviously, there's many questions that will need some answers. We're expecting that there'll be a transparent investigation on what happened. Canadians and families need answers.
First of all, my heart goes out to the families of and loved ones of those who died. It is really important that they get answers, that we all get answers on what happens, and that's why we need open and transparent investigations to provide answers to Canadians on individual cases. But we also need to pay attention to the larger systemic challenges that these are illustrative of.
C'est public, ça, une enquête ouverte et transparente?
It's public, an open and transparent investigation. The answers to this investigation must be public. On systemic racism, there's a question that's been very clear about the Laurier Club. You didn't really answer. There's racism in all the institutions, but you're not proposing many solutions. It's nice to give lessons, but you must also give some solutions. We have been working for the last few days to deepen our work in our exchanges with Indigenous communities that are racialized. We know that there are many propositions that have been made in various reports and various... we know that there are some things that we can do. Now we're working with the communities to have some priorities on which we should do first, and we'll have more to say soon.
We have, over the past years and decades, received many stacks of recommendations, of analyses, of reports on measures that can be taken to better fight against systemic racism, to reduce inequities in our system against racialized Canadians and Indigenous Canadians in particular. It is a question of picking which of those recommendations we should be moving forward with first, and that's why we're working with Indigenous leadership and communities, working with the Black community, working with racialized Canadians to prioritize exactly what things we should do rapidly, right away. We'll have more to say in the coming days on that.
Marika Walsh with the Globe and Mail. Prime Minister, the shooting death on Friday is the latest of 6 since April. 6 Indigenous people have been shot and killed by police in Canada. 2 other Indigenous people have died in the company or in the custody of police, but the circumstances of their deaths are unknown. That's just in the last 3 months. What specifically will your government do to ensure this doesn't continue?
There is systemic racism in Canada, and it means that Indigenous people, Black Canadians and racialized Canadians are far more likely to suffer violence at the hands of the authorities and police than non-racialized Canadians. This is a problem that we have seen for many years. We have made steps to improve it, but there is a need for much more, much quicker. And that's why we are working right now with communities to address the first things that need to be done most rapidly, and we are going to move forward with them rapidly. Okay. We
recognize that for a long time we have a system that treats Indigenous, racialized Canadians in a different way than non-racialized Canadians. We have made some measures over the last few years to try to better things, but obviously there's so much more to do, and we will do it. Actually, we're working with experts in various communities. We're working with various groups to identify which will be the measures that we should take in priority quickly, and we'll have some announcements to do.
Your previous answer, very specifically acknowledged that you've had these reports and these recommendations, and you have been in government for 5 years, and the action has not been taken. One of the very specific recommendations from Murray Sinclair is that police be screened for their attitudes on race. Do you support that, and will that be implemented?
We have, over the past years, including under Commissioner Lucky, transformed a number of the protocols around hiring at the RCMP, although other police forces are jurisdictions of other orders of governments, and we will commit to doing more. We know there are many, many different things that need to happen in order to go after and to reduce systemic racism, and we will work with communities to prioritize which ones we should do first and most rapidly.
So will you accept it?
Nous reconnaissons qu'il y a énormément à faire.
That there's a lot to do in the years to come. We took some concrete steps for the last 4 or 5 years, but there's more to do, and we're going to keep working with the RCMP and with, like all orders of government, will work with their police corps to better recruiting and the process.
Good morning, Mr. GCBC. On the CERB extension possibility, obviously there's an issue here in terms of the numbers of people on CERB as opposed to companies with the wage subsidy, very low uptake on the wage subsidy. So with this extension and provinces reopening, what more can your government do to encourage companies to use the wage subsidy aside from just begging and pleading?
Every week we see more and more companies take on the wage subsidy as their economies, as our local economies reopen. We have millions of Canadians receiving the wage subsidy, and we're seeing as people get back to work, as jobs get created, people are taking it up. The CERB was designed to keep everyone at home and allow us to get through the initial wave of this pandemic. Now, as we move into the recovery phase, we're seeing more and more companies take on the wage subsidy, which is a good thing. But even with economy reopening, we know there are many jobs that aren't going to be coming back in the short term, and that's why we are looking at continuing to help people who are on the CERB who can't find a job. Okay.
Millions of Canadians that are benefiting from the wage subsidy. With the reopening of the economy, there are more and more jobs created, and people are leaving the CERB to go and get work and the wage subsidy to help them with their salaries. We still have work to do, because even with the reopening of the economy, there are many jobs that have disappeared, that are not being recreated quickly, and we'll be there to continue to help those who can't find a job.
When you see the dramatic spike in coronavirus cases in a fair number of U.S. states, New York's governor, Texas's governor, they're musing about possibly going into lockdown mode again. What specific concerns are there for your government in that, when you think of obviously the border restrictions and the talks to keep that ongoing? How concerning is that?
On Thursday night with the premiers, we had another good conversation around the border restrictions, particularly with the United States. And it is clear that there is broad consensus across the provinces that we need to continue to keep our current border measures in place. We will keep discussing with the United States administration on ways forward. But our priority on this is to ensure that we're keeping Canadians safe while continuing to ensure the flow of essential goods and services.
Last Thursday with the Prime Minister, we discussed the issue of the border. There is a broad consensus. The Prime Ministers of provinces want us to continue with the current border measures with the United States. We're discussing with the administration of the United States to continue to make sure that we keep the safety of Canadians.
Prime Minister, last week there were reports that your immigration minister presented a plan to give permanent residency status to asylum seekers who are working in the healthcare industry here in Canada. What will the eligibility criteria be? And also, will that be extended to essential workers, not just healthcare workers?
Obviously, Canada is a country that has a strong immigration system, and part of the strength of that immigration system is that it is a rigorous application of immigration rules that reassures Canadians that we can continue to be positive towards immigration, even as people around the world turn away from immigration. At the same time, we recognize the extraordinary work done by many vulnerable people to care for other vulnerable people, including asylum seekers. And we are, of course, looking at ways to recognize the invaluable support that they've given to Canadians at a very difficult time.
I think that one of the principles that reassures Canadians towards immigration is that we've got a system is rigorous, where the rules are being applied uniformly across the country. At the same time, we recognize that we are in a situation where many vulnerable people, asylum seekers, have committed to help the elderly, vulnerable people themselves. So we are looking into ways to support them.
Good morning, Prime Minister David Aiken, Global News. Just come back to the Canada-U.S. border. Despite everybody's consensus to keep it sort of as tight as it is now, we're seeing some loopholes. We're seeing American tourists transit to Alaska from the lower 48, stop in at Banff for a day or two. We've heard of stories of people denied the ability to, non-essential people coming across a land border who have then flown across the border. Is this acceptable? What's your government thinking about that?
Obviously, we've heard those reports over the past few days and are looking into them. I think as we continue our conversations with the Americans, as we look at adjusting or shifting our posture in certain ways, we need to make sure that we're able to apply the rules consistently and that we're doing everything necessary to keep Canadians safe at this important time. Évidemment, j'ai entendu ces rapports et nous sommes en train de regarder ce qu'on peut faire pendant qu'on négocie avec les Américains sur une prolongation possible de cette restriction aux frontières. Nous allons nous assurer d'essayer de prioriser, comme toujours, la protection des Canadiens.
Thank you. This is what ends